Well, since we've heard about all the doom and gloom of EMPs, we've covered that. Let's talk about EMP protection. So, like,
Mhm.
what is EMP protection? How does it work? Do devices work? And then we can get into some of the different types of products and
Sure.
devices.
Yeah. So, it depends on what you're trying to protect, of course. The best, surest way to have something that will survive an EMP is to have it not plugged into a long conductor like the grid, and then to have it shielded in some way, right? Because that means the energy essentially will bounce off of the conductor that's shielding it, or it will get absorbed by the conductor. And so people make Faraday cages, ad hoc Faraday cages out of garbage cans or big Faraday bags where you can put them in their metallized bag. All those work pretty well, to be honest. They might take 99.9% of the energy out before it gets to the contents. And so most anything will survive if you put it in one of these Faraday cages. So that works great for things like, a spare computer or some, radios or whatever kinds of small scale things you want to store. You can even create rooms that are the same way. I have a Faraday room at my work, and they're basically big shielded metal rooms, very tightly sealed from RF energy. They have filters on the wall, so all the power comes through these filters. So everything in there is protected from energy that might come in. So it's an expensive solution for people in a home, though. Those rooms are very expensive, but it can be done. Certainly, facilities have those kinds of things. But for the layperson, you might think about, well, all right, how do I protect just like my stuff? The things in my house, my car. All right, we can start there. How do I protect my car? Well, your car's really the only thing that's going to damage your car is probably the E1, because that's that really fast energy that could come in and get in your car's electronics. And the best way to protect is if you could cover your car all the time with something conductive, like a big conductive cover, it would almost certainly survive, right?
Right.
The problem is, and we sell those covers at disasterrepair.com, they're very expensive. I mean, to cover a car might cost $3,000 for this blanket, right? It's just so expensive. That might be worth more than some people's car. So covering it, and you can't have it when you're driving, right? You're driving, you can't be covered. So it's only when you're parked anyway. But that's an option. Another option is to put in transient protection as many places in the car as you can. A lot of people think they just want to put, one big box somewhere and I'm good now. But, if you think about it, well, the energy right there might be, suppressed. But what about at the other side of my car? That's not connected over there. There's be big wires, and the energy is going to come in and cause damage over there, right? So what I tell people is you want to get as many points of protection in a car as you can. All right. And I don't care whose product you use, that's what you want to do. So years ago, I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe, I developed these little tiny called traps, transient reducing auxiliary plugs. They go in a cigarette lighter. And they're only about yay big. They're like a little cigarette lighter plug. People were like, those things aren't going to protect against the EMP. Well, keep in mind, if you could have 3 or 4 of those in, now I've got 3 or 4 places distributed in my car that are going to be able to drain away really fast energy, right? And this energy is damaging, but it's very short in time. So it doesn't overheat things very easily. So the more you can put in, the better. So we came up with a kit. I have a pretty good kit right now. It's actually grown quite a bit in the last few years, where you can have multiple points on a car. So you can certainly one in each auxiliary receptacle. That means each cigarette lighter plug. Some cars have a couple of them. Something across the battery, which sends the energy that might couple into the battery connected systems right close to it. You can put these ferrites, which are just these ferrous materials you can clip around the main wires that might go off to your engine control unit or something like that, your main fuse box, to try and dampen energy that gets on those cables. And just recently, we came out with a plug that plugs on your OBD2 plug, your onboard diagnostics plug, which is the little thing under your dash usually that the technician comes in and plugs into and interrogates your car. Well, we made a little one that you can just plug up in there that is another transient suppression point, which again, just tries to drain that energy away. So if you counted them up, you might have 6 places that there's energy being drained away in your system, which is about as good as you're going to get without designing a car from scratch and putting in transient protection at every computer. So that's the way I've always advised people, is try and get as many small protections as you can, as opposed to one, honking thing that's really localized. So that's the way I do cars. For homes, it's a little bit different, sort of different.
Okay, let me ask you one question, a couple questions on cars real quick. Is you mentioned earlier that if an EMP were to hit and your car was connected to the battery, to disconnect the battery, What's the reason behind that? Why does somebody want to do that? Like, because the EMP's already hit, right? So
yeah, EMP's already hit. Whatever's happened is going to happen, right? But the system, it could have thrown the system into some anomalous state, right? So your computers, maybe one or many of them, are going, oh, I don't know where I'm at. I don't know what's happened in this system. And you have to power it completely down. Just like our computers and our phones, sometimes you get into those states, you just can't. And they're like, did you reboot your phone? And as soon as you reboot it, it's all good, right? Because it knows how to boot itself up clean. And your car is the same thing. If you pull all power and you let it come down, and then you reconnect it and let it come up, it's going to pull memory from pre-stored information and come up in its known state, assuming nothing's damaged, which is why I recommend that. Now, I will say one small caveat. I used to have a car that you did not want to remove the battery, because when you did, it went into a state that it couldn't recover from. It had to have power all the time. I won't mention the brand Mercedes, but it was the only Mercedes I ever had. I was not like I'm posh or something, but I just happened to have one, and it was a car that if you disconnected the battery, it went into an unknown state when you reconnected it. So you, like when people change batteries, they had to hook power to it, then take off the battery, and then put a new battery and then remove power. It was a weird thing. But most cars are not like that. Most cars, you can take the battery out. Nobody knows the difference. But so that's just the reason I do that.
Okay.
Try and clean boot. Yeah.
Gotcha. What are your thoughts on when you hear people, about, hey, if you have a pre-electronic ignition car, or what, do you have any ideas on that, or kind of time frame, what you're looking at, like maybe before what kind of year or something, or?
Yeah, people write about that a lot. Like, I have a 1991, whatever, is it going to be damaged by an EMP? And the short answer is, the older the car, well, really, it's the less complicated the car's electronics, the more likely it would be to survive, right? But even in 2005, there was drastic differences in the complications of the electronics. And so it's difficult to say by year. But it's certainly true if you have a simple pickup truck and there's no complicated electronics that you know of on it, you have a much better chance of it not being damaged than a modern, Cadillac Escalade where everything is digital, of every sort. So that's as far as I could say on that. I don't know, it all depends on the model. And the funny thing is, you could have two identical cars that are no different in any way, except for they're facing 90 degrees to one another, and one could be damaged by an EMP and one might not be. Because energy is very directional in how it couples into things. A conductor laid one way couples energy if it's coming in this way better than a conductor laid the other way. So it's impossible to say, oh, all 2017 blanks are going to be affected, because it would depend. Am I in a garage? Am I parked at this angle? Is there a mountain nearby? There's just so many. And it could even be, is there a lamppost next to me that might provide some kind of shielding or some kind of, energy diversion? There's so many complications to it that the best you can say is if it's got modern electronics, it's susceptible. All right. And that's kind of where I fall on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's wild. I didn't know about the angles and stuff. That's really interesting. So yeah, there really is no telling on how that will roll out. Now you hear a lot of people saying that, asking are military vehicles EMP proof? Has the military done anything to harden their vehicles? Or
I would say probably. I know they have been tested. There was way back from the 70s, there was a place called the Trestle. You might, if you Google it, you'll find it. It was a big, gigantic wooden structure they built for testing military vehicles for EMP. I actually had the privilege of writing someone whose father worked on it and built it, and they sent me a picture of it. I put it in my book, as a matter of fact, my EMP book. And they built the whole thing out of wood, including all the attachment, all the screw fasteners, everything's wood, because they didn't want to affect the fields, right? They wanted to have pure electromagnetic fields. And so they did a lot of real world hands-on EMP testing on aircraft and vehicles. And we learned a lot from that. And so I have to assume our modern military vehicles are hardened. How hard, I don't know, but they're hardened, just like our satellite systems are hardened as well. We understand there are electromagnetic threats and our enemy has them. So I'm not so worried about military as I am, our normal industrial commercial.
Okay. What about the thought of especially nowadays, people are building barndominiums and metal buildings. Parking your vehicle in a metal building that's earth grounded, would that do anything? It can help.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sure. A metal building like a shed or something like that might drop the energy by 90%. Let's say the field levels drop by 90%. So now let's say you're in a 20,000 volt per meter field that comes in, which is damaging. but now it's 2000 volts per meter, let's say, right? Well, 2000 is bad, but not that bad. And if my car is unpowered and sitting under a shed, probably be okay. So it makes a difference, right? Anything you can do to improve your chances is good, but you have to keep it in perspective. I always tell people, there are no guarantees with EMP protection, all right? Because there's just too many unknowns. And if people offer you a guarantee, well, we'll pay you $100,000 if something is damaged. Okay, that's marketing 101, okay? Right? I'll offer you anything I want because guess what? If an EMP happens, you're not going to be calling me asking for your $100,000.
Good luck with
right?
that.
Yeah. So I always just tell people there are no guarantees. You put in place some protections to buy down your risk. And something like a metallized building is a great way to buy down your risk. Plus, you get some benefit to keep the weather off your car. So
yeah, right. You mentioned when you were just a minute ago that if your vehicle's powered on, so if you're driving your vehicle or your vehicle's turned on and an EMP hits when that happens, that E1 wave hits you, does that increase the likelihood of damage to your vehicle?
I would think so. Yeah. I don't want to oversell it because there's no data to say it's
Sure.
X percentage more likely, but it makes sense that if you think about all these IC chips, right, and they're all powered on, they have a safe operating level. So let's say you have a normal 5-volt system, and it might allow you to run at 6.5 volts before damage starts to occur, right? And so I have to couple enough energy to cause damage to go above, let's say, that 6.5 volts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I'm unpowered, I'm at ground potential. I don't have any energy. I've got to go all the way from ground up above the max operating point, and which just seems a little bit harder. So it should be a little harder to damage a car that's unpowered, in all things being equal, than if it is powered, just because there's already energy in the system if it's turned on.
Oh, okay. No, good to know. I know you sell a product on your site called DEFCON Vehicle Protection, and you talked about the different ferrites and stuff that you have. What is the DEFCON shield? How does how does that work?
I do have one of these DEFCON vehicles here. Maybe you can see it here. It looks like so. And this is an example of a product that connects across the battery. Now, I don't want to oversell it. It's a very robust product. We just came out with it a little while ago, but it takes massive amounts of current to damage it. So it will sink any E1 energy, any E2 energy without being damaged. But again, it's just one point of protection, right? And so the small little tiny traps, which don't look so important, they're really important to have distributed around the vehicle as well. And so I try and remind people of that. Yes, these are really robust and they're impressive, but think distributed protection if you really want to be protected. This is just a piece of it. Ferrites are important. These small plugs are important. Truth be told is I'd rather have 10 small things on my vehicle than 2 gigantic things on my vehicle. I just think you get better protection from a distributed system.
Okay. And I was watching one of your videos, and basically my takeaway was when that hits, you're just trying to absorb all the energy into that before it can damage the vehicle, right? So it's kind of like is it like a fuse for basically?
It's like an over voltage switch. And so, you hook this across the line to the chassis. And when the level on the line gets above a certain voltage, that's above your normal operating voltages, right?
Sure.
Then it turns this switch on, and the switch drains the energy down and pulls that line down and prevents the line from going above a certain amount. And so it acts as like a drain for that temporary unwanted transient energy. And that's the way the traps work as well. Okay. They just essentially are like these little voltage controlled switches that turn on and prevent you from getting too high a voltage. Now, if the voltage comes back down, the switch opens back up and the system just keeps running. It doesn't have to reset itself or anything like that. So on the one side of it, we have those voltage protection devices, which are like the traps and the DEFCON vehicle, right? They turn on when a certain voltage is reached and drain the energy. The ferrites are a little different. They clip around wires, and as the current flows through the wire, it generates a magnetic field, which goes in that ferrous material. And then if the current tries to change suddenly, like a sudden glitch of current wants to come through the system, right? The ferrous material resists that change and it dampens that pulse. So what you might see on one side is a sharp pulse, and what you might see on the other side is a teeny tiny pulse because it's got absorbed into that ferrous material. So they're pretty slick little things. We've known about them forever. They're on your power cords of all kind of things. You probably have never even noticed. They're little round things that built in the power cord. But we made some big ones and some special ones specifically for EMP, and it would handle high currents. And you can put those around the battery wires to help with current transients that might flow. I always tell people don't put them on data wires, anything communicating. Just put them on power and ground wires, because you can actually mess up the communications because they kind of spread out the energy a little bit. But between those, between the transient voltage devices and the ferrites for current protection, you get this distributed sort of surge protection, which is what you're after.
The last question on the vehicles is, and then we'll go to the home, is it your ferrites and the DEFCON vehicle protect? Is that fairly easy for, just a Joe average person to install, or?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Just about anybody could install all of the products. So the traps are, they plug in your cigarette lighter. So that's just plugging something in.
Right.
The DEFCON vehicle has 4 wires on it. It's basically just wire up across your battery and over to frame. All right. 3 wires, I guess, wire across your battery and a wire to frame. And then the ferrites just clip around the wires. They're just like little clamshells that just snap shut over them. So the whole thing you could probably install in 10 minutes. I mean, even the DEFCON only takes a couple of minutes. So they're real simple to put on.
Okay, great.